Well, unfortunately, you're in a minority of two. Hopefully that can change into the future. But to your credit, prior to the May budget, you also brought out an alternative budget plan. And I think all Australians were shocked on budget night when it turns out Labor's the same as Liberal, Liberal's the same as Labor with tax and spend, debt and deficit. You've got an alternative approach. And if you can walk us through these 4 graphics that David's brought in to have a look at the budgetary situation in Canberra. The first of them is a graph there that looks at the growing welfare state. The 4 colours there combined are social security, health, education and defence. It starts out, David, just before the Whitlam era. That first year is 71-72, and it shows that those 4 areas combined have grown from 45% of Commonwealth spending through to 65% today. How's it got out of control and what can we do about it?
Well, as you can see there, the big growth has been in health, welfare and education. They're the 2 big ones. And they've been growing substantially over the last, decades, ever since the Whitlam era. I mean, when Gough came in, we all were horrified by how much he increased government spending. But, you know, compared to today's governments, and it's both sides of Parliament, both the current government and the previous Labor government, compared to Gough's era, you know, they make Gough look like a miser. Scrooge, indeed, yes.
That's right, who would have thought?
Yeah, who would have thought, indeed. You know, he loved throwing money at things. But boy, didn't he set a pattern? And so, you know, we do have a problem. And the problem areas, it's not a defence, as you can see from that. As a share, it stayed pretty much the same. What's the blue one?
The blue one is health.
Health, oh yeah. Okay.
It's grown as well.
It's grown as well.
Health. The yellow is social security and welfare, and the blue is health, and those 3 combined obviously represent the biggest area of growth. They've really ballooned, haven't they? They become the backbone of the welfare state.
Yes, that's right. And occasionally I hear people say, oh, we should stop spending money on submarines and defence in general, and there's lots to be saved in defence. But the point about it, of course, is even if we didn't spend a cent on defence, it really wouldn't make any difference to the overall trend. The overall trend is up. Always up, being driven by health, education, welfare. Yeah,
and I suppose welfare buying votes. Politicians love to give the welfare money away
and buy
welfare. The votes. And the second graph you've got is the growth in government per capita, per person. So if we can look there at the growth, well, that's alarming, isn't it?
That is very alarming. That's after inflation, so we're not talking about the effect of inflation. What we're seeing is a steady, inexorable, almost inexorable increase in both revenue and spending, because once governments get money, they can't help but spend it. They don't give it back to us in tax cuts too often. And it's just a steady growth pretty much ever since the Whitlam years. And if you look on the far right there, you'll see the forecast as well. The government is forecasting revenue will catch up to spending, and you can notice that the blue line is revenue and spending is above it. So that's the reason we've got a deficit, and also why we've accumulated debt. And the government is forecasting that revenue will catch up to spending over the forecast period. That's totally unbelievable. They've been forecasting that every year for about the last 10 years, and it's not happened yet.
It's an amazing increase, isn't it? 6,000 up to 15,000 per person.
Absolutely
growth of government.
We are a highly taxed country, and the problem is too much spending. You know, we have these arguments from time to time. Do we have a spending problem or a revenue problem? The answer is, if spending didn't go up all the time, there wouldn't be this perennial chase or this constant chase for more revenue. So putting taxes up. You know, the Medicare levy is going up. The bank tax went up. The bank tax is nothing but a revenue chase. You know, all this justification about, oh, banks are special and all that sort of stuff. It's a load of nonsense. It's just a revenue chase.
Yeah, well, all the way. And the third graph is outlining Liberal Democrat policy and looking at the possibility of tax cuts. So talk us through this one.
Yes, okay. So
this is your alternative budget.
This alternative budget, yeah. So each year for the last 4 years, I've presented an alternative budget in the financial review. And so I've talked about specifically where would I cut spending in order to balance the budget and then and pay off the debt and bring us back into a situation somewhat like we had, you know, even when Whitlam was in power. So those are the areas I would cut. There would be cuts to health, welfare and various other areas. abolishing state grants, so let the states fund their own expenditure. Corporate welfare, there's quite a lot of money goes to companies in the form of welfare of various kinds. Foreign aid, except for short-term humanitarian assistance. Cutting out, handing out money to people who can't cut it in the commercial world. So artists who can't sell their products, ABC, SBS funding, all that sort of stuff.
Well, we support that. And of course the benefit there is to balance the budget and beyond that to pay back debt.
Yes.
But those tax cuts are massive, aren't they, to move to a 20% income tax system with $40,000 tax-free threshold.
Well, that's right. And one of my staff is ex-Treasury and he knows how to calculate, you know, what things cost. So this is not airy-fairy stuff. We do know that if we cut back on the spending areas that we believe don't deserve to be funded, aren't warranted, we could afford those sort of tax cuts. So our policy is, I think it's on the next graphic.
Yeah,
actually.
on the fourth graphic here, you can see the scale of the tax cuts, the current system versus David's proposal. David's proposal is the dark line there, and the red line's the current system. Yeah. And just to give you a guide to some of the savings, people earning $80,000 a year, it's a $10,000 tax cut. $100,000 a year, $17,000, and $140,000. Not a huge income in places like Sydney and Melbourne. It's a $23,000 per annum tax cut. So you're talking the real deal here.
Yes, that's right. And the basis of this is that you can use that money more productively, more effectively than the government can. When the government is handing out money to people it likes or people it thinks need it or spending it on things, they don't spend the money anywhere near as efficiently as we do when it's our own money. We're careful about what we buy with our money and we get better value for it. And, you know, the old statement is if somebody else is spending somebody else's money, you know, they just don't care that much about it. You think about, you know, spending someone else's money to buy a present for somebody else. You know, how much time and effort are you going to put into it? Whereas if you're spending it on yourself, spending your money on yourself, you'll spend a lot of time thinking about whether you're going to get value for money and if it's the right thing.
Well, I think a lot of Australians would take heart from it because if you're a Liberal Party supporter, you'd be devastated that they produced a Labor-light budget, tax and spend, debt and deficit. So it's almost like Liberals are thinking, oh, maybe it's not possible to get tax cuts and bring the budget back into balance. And if you're a Labor supporter, well, you gave up on that years ago, you know, under Wayne Swan.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at least you're showing Australians this budget fiscal restraint is possible and there can be a dividend and the economic benefit to kickstart the economy of these big tax cuts would be enormous, wouldn't it?
Yes. The Reagan tax cuts in America showed that. He lowered the tax progressively during his tenure as president with the support of Congress, of course. And in each occasion, the actual revenue that the government raised, the US government raised from the economy increased because the economy gathered more momentum. And that's what happens when you cut taxes. Business goes ahead, people get jobs, people pay taxes on their income, companies pay taxes on their corporate profits, and the government collects that. And of course it reduces the amount of welfare that the government has to pay because there are more people in jobs. So government spending can go down, government revenue can go up, they balance the budget, they can afford more tax cuts then after a little while. So you do it step by step as you bring the budget into...
Yeah, a virtuous cycle.
Yes.